Hi everybody, welcome. This is the University of Applied Research and Development and our Emergency Response podcast and videocast. It is our honour and privilege to have one of our contributing faculty members, Paul Mikita, who is the Lead Emergency Preparedness Specialist in New Brunswick at a very large hospital. Welcome, Paul.
Hey, how we doing?
So good to have you here because you've been through that process of establishing a command centre. And I think it would be fantastic for people that are interested in emergency response to understand how you did that, how you established it, who you talked to, the structure, the technology, even the theory behind how you did that. So why don't you take us through it?
Thing with a command center is it doesn't need to be a huge elaborate thing. It could be one person with the radio standing at the side of a road at a car accident, up to and including these larger, federal type operation centers. Each of them, though, all have the same common purpose: information in, information processed, information out. And everything that's within the command center should be designed so that at the end of the day, that function can be completed in a timely manner. How the resources you need for that to manage a motor vehicle accident are different than you would need to manage a hospital. The type of personnel, the things you're looking at, the resources required. So when you're trying to put together a command center, the biggest thing is to try to figure out what the big picture of what you're trying to manage is. So for the hospital, it's trying to make sure we have communication with all of the appropriate service lines within the hospital, as well as external partners, our law enforcement, our fire, our local and county offices of emergency management. And then how do we communicate within our facility? Then also looking at how you communicate within the command center itself. During our recent COVID pandemic response, we wound up realizing that having all of the computers with a generic login, with the same login, did not allow them to talk to each other. So we had to share information either by voice, which becomes very inefficient because there's room for people to misunderstand what's going on, or we had to, if we were sharing a file, one of us had to close it so the other one could edit it so we could open it back up again. So trying to look at technology to help share information in a much faster method than we could by voice. At the end of the day, everything kind of revolves around some sort of standardized structure. We use an incident command structure here. So there's an incident commander who's responsible for the overall operations of our facility. And then we kind of break down the functions based off of what we're looking at. We were looking at needing resources for logistics, getting personal protective equipment, getting medical supplies and treatment stuff in. So that kind of fell to our logistics and our materials management staff. Operations-wise, we had to put together a grouping of nurses and physicians that allowed us to manage the clinical management of these patients. How to bring facilities in. So the trick there is trying to isolate these things in such a manner that you can still have an efficient level of communication. Usually associated with something called a span of control. For most people, that's usually about most positions, about 5 to 7 reporting individuals or groups. I tend to describe that to a lot of people of, okay, if you're sitting there in front of, how many people can you be in front of and have them all talking at the same time and understand what each of them is saying? Now, if it's 3 people, that's your span of control. If it's 5 people, that's your span of control. But the ultimate game plan there is for you to be able to focus equally on each of those areas that report to you. So we kind of build things out in that way. That's kind of the basic foundation of this. Then moving from there, it's kind of it's utilizing the technology to support that. It could be a radio on my side and a piece of tape on my leg that kind of help me start jotting notes as to what's going on. What I usually wind up doing with our staff in the hospital is on a quarterly basis, I do what I call hospital command center drills. So any staff that can be involved in command center operations, I bring into the command center. I get them familiar with the technology, the processes, and for each position, we actually have a job action sheet developed. So in a lot of cases, most of us have never been in a command level position. So it just becomes a quick reminder of things that you should be doing to make sure that we're doing this effectively. On the flip end of this, I apologize, I'm kind of going all over the place, but I'll circle back around to kind of close everything up. The other aspect of this is planning. You can't have a command center or an effective command center without having it planned out, either in processes or the technology or the personnel. And a lot of that will come back to who needs to be there, what are they responsible for, and who's the best, and what is the best technology and processes to support them. In a lot of cases, those of us who are in business, which most of us are in some way, shape, or form, we actually utilize a command structure during our everyday. Your frontline staff report to a supervisor, the supervisor reports to a manager, the manager reports to an assistant director, and so on and so forth up the chain. Each of those little branches is designed to help organize things into buckets. So night shift, day shift, first shift, shift A, shift B, however we choose to do it. So getting an effective command center kind of rolls into those things and needs to embrace them. I often find the trick with setting up any emergency management procedure is to get the emergency management to pair up with the real life, but on the other side, getting real life, what we do on an everyday basis, to pair up with emergency management. Now, if I sit there and say, no, you're going to be the incident commander, and you've never done it before, because you're a frontline staff, you're not going to be as effective at it, or I'm going to have to do more education and familiarity with that role than if I take a director or a VP who's used to managing the hospital on the everyday basis. So personnel-wise, you want to try to align what you have with what you need. As I mentioned, on the planning side, a lot of this falls into the basis of a hazard and vulnerability assessment. You want to make sure that what you have in play and the redundancies you have in play all line up with what your facility could be facing. And where we are and the resources available are going to differ. I live in a suburban, somewhat urban area. We have a lot more resources available to us than a department that will be rural. More rural. They may take a lot more stuff. Somebody who's on an oil rig has markedly less resources immediately available to them than even somebody who lives in a rural environment. So we're trying to make sure that what we're pairing up is effective for what we need, both in the short term for a quick, what we call a quick no notice event, as well as something that may be more prolonged. Coming back to the staffing, you want to have a representation of each of the main functional areas available in the command center. The challenge we had during COVID is our normal command center would have 12 or 15 people in it. But because of social distancing, we can only have like 6. So we wound up having the issue of trying to take something that we were used to doing face to face and applying technology to have it be done remotely. But thankfully, we were able to do that and accomplish that rather successfully. So realistically, the big steps here are identification of what you need, realizing that it's not just all about the location. Incident command can be run from anywhere. I actually had when I was on the first aid squad, I actually had a fire chief who actually had fun running as many fires as he could from the firehouse. just to prove a point that he didn't have to be there. I mean, obviously he would show up, but he would initially start running the resources from the firehouse because he had the technology he needed there to know what resources were available. Okay. Outside of that, it's knowing what you need, putting a lot of tools in place. This is not something we do on a daily basis. So anything we can put in play to help standardize the response so that at the end of the day, even if I'm not there, the tools I put in place, I can be pretty well rest assured that the facility is working in the direction I want it to go. I always tell people when I tell people to put a plan together, I never tell them to plan for the whole event. I always tell them to plan for the first 20 minutes because that tends to be more reasonable for people. And that first 20 minutes, it's what's your setup, it's who do you need to bring in play, who do you need to communicate with, and usually somewhere in there is communication with the people that actually know what the heck is going on. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that nothing, that the processes and the direction that's put in play through the command center actually is not going to need to be changed. So that I can actually take I can take that frontline staff, put them in a command center position, have them initiate care and services and stuff like that. And at the end of the day, he can turn over care to a director who can then continue that up the chain. And at the end of the day, we don't have to make a 180 during any of the response. So, any questions on your end with regards to things?
Paul, could you describe for us, if someone was walking into the command center, what would it look like? What would they see in terms of layout and technology and furniture?
Realistically, we actually have one of the more, I don't want to say simplified command centers, but we actually use a regular everyday conference room that we have a couple of cabinets in with some technology. So when we open up, it's 5 or 6 laptops that are all joined to the hospital network. We have the ability to project those laptops onto one of 3 television screens and a projector, so that if any basically what we primarily use that for resource requesting and situational awareness. So we break the table up by different functions. Closest to the door is our incident commander. So if anything, if they do need to get called out for, to talk to administration, but not interrupting the rest of the operations. Closely associated with them is our operations section. Then down we have logistics. We have a situation group, which is where we actually, all the phone calls into the command center are filtered. 2 or 3 people that are just there answering the phone and putting information into the computer. The information they put in the computer is projected onto one of the television screens so that everybody knows resource-wise where we are, what's pending. We actually developed a Excel spreadsheet that, based off of the status that's selected for a row, the row will be a certain color. So if a resource request comes in and it's typed in by the situation unit, it'll pop up on the screen and it's red. I now know that we have a resource request that is pending assignment. Now, then based off of now it being assigned and in process and completed, we have different colors so that visually we don't need to worry about, we don't need to do a lot of guessing as to where we are with requests. Now, if there's 10 lines up there and 6 of them are red, well, I know somewhere along the line we dropped the ball with getting those requests. We try to build a lot of our stuff on visual cues because during an emergency, most people tend to rely on that visual component more so than they do the actual typing or the text in a particular file. That tends to be more of a secondary type process. So it's one long conference table. 6 computers, each that kind of have the ability to project out to 3 televisions and a overhead projector, a printer. We actually designate each of our areas. What we did, because our staff is not 100% familiar with the roles and functions of each of the command positions. And usually for command, they usually like wear there's usually the incident command vests. Trying to get people to wear those vests is not always the easiest thing to do. So what we actually did is we actually took the table display signs. So we have an 8.5 by 11 sign, that the acrylic ones. We kind of color coded them. It'll say incident commander on one side, so everyone knows I'm the incident commander. And on the side that faces me, it'll say incident commander, so I know I'm the incident commander. But in the bottom right-hand corner, we kind of did a quick cheat sheet. These are my general responsibilities. So we have the job action sheet that kind of gives me more detail of what I'm responsible for. But then I have this one little quick reference guide that'll give me the idea of kind of where I need to go. I said, and so each of those is also built as visual cues. The command, so incident command is green. Anything that dealing with operations is orange. Yellow for logistics. Blue for planning. So we try to do those visual cues that anybody walking in can know by the color that's on the table who's responsible for what. So that we can kind of go in and kind of hit and have as efficient communication as possible during the height of any potential emergency.
I was going to say, and then you said that you try to rely on visual cues. Sounds very visual, so people can see at a glance and everyone can see the shared information. I was going to ask about leadership. Sorry, did you want to say?
Well, I was going to go back. Part of the planning thing. I always have fun when it's always it always sits with me. When I was going for my master's degree, the one class I took was involved emergency operations plan development, and we had to do online posting. Develop. Here's a scenario. Put a plan together, and at the end of the day, post it and make comments back and everything else. The one student in my class, when he posted his plan, he got a whole litany of comments. And when I looked at it, I wound up realizing why. The first step of his plan was panic. And you can imagine the litany of comments that came out of that. But his reply to those comments was actually very interesting. And and it still sits with me today. And this is 10 plus years ago. Even though it is the one thing we do not want our first responders or our responders to do, it is the first thing we have to acknowledge they will do. So any plan, any process, anything we put in place has to be able to shorten that gap between, holy crap, what just happened, and I got this. And I tended to find that visual cues and diagrams tend to work that a lot better than just the specific step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. And we kind of took this visualization process down to even like the emergency department level. So if you were to walk into our emergency department during any mass casualty activation, our staff wear different colored vests based off of what they're capable of doing. So if I can walk into a room and know that I have enough services to manage those patients, or I don't have enough services. It's quick, it's down and dirty. I don't need to worry about people knowing who's who. At the end of the day, if you're wearing a certain color vest, I know what role you have. I know I can ask you to do certain things.
I was going to ask about leadership, because some people in regular life, maybe there's not the time pressures that there are when there's an emergency going on, and we can focus on perfection and getting everything right. How does leadership change when you're in an incident command center?
Realistically, when we don't have the time to be able to prioritize those routine requests, leadership does change a little bit. What's actually weird with leadership during an emergency is you do not want to micromanage. Basically, the easiest thing to do is set an objective, put it in the hands of the right people, and let them do what they need to do. When I do my teaching, when I teach the command staff, I always tell them the command center always determines the what needs to be done. We leave it to the frontline staff to determine the how. Once they determine the how, they then put a request back up to the command center to give them the support they need. So the command center does two things. It determines the what needs to be done, and it then supports the how. So that at the end of the day, you know, we can then focus on the more strategic component of what's going on. Ultimately, life preservation, safety of our personnel, you know, those types of things.
Yeah, that's really good. So Paul, just to wrap up, if someone was needing to set up an incident command center, what do you think is the best thing they can do? Is it to go and visit other command centers or focus on theory? What should be the way they approach it?
Actually, the best answer to that is if they've never dealt with the command center before, it's a combination of both. You know, you need to figure out, as I mentioned before, the hazard assessment to figure out exactly what are you dealing with. The command center for emergency A may require different resources than the command center for emergency B. Command center for the hospital is a different animal than our county emergency command center because we have different responsibilities. So getting an idea of what you're responsible for, the tools you need, and definitely visiting other command centers for layout and structure tend to be very helpful if you have the ability to design from the ground up. Because different layouts have different advantages. Like I said, at my hospital, we pretty much turned around and we took a conference room, threw a couple of cabinets in it with some supplies that we've designated for emergency declarations, and we've been able to, for years, been able to manage the operations of an entire hospital and integrate with our community partners using nothing more than a conference room table and 6 laptops and a couple of phones.
And I think that's great for people to know that you can just get it done if you need to get it done without having a $1 billion budget.
Correct. It does not need to be this huge, elaborate, thing that you see in a lot of areas. I don't need to have a wall of TVs. It's nice to have, but sometimes the issue you have with that is you actually get information overload. As I said, you want this to be information in, information processed, information out as quickly and as concisely as possible.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Paul, do you have any parting thoughts for people who are interested in this area and running and being an incident commander?
Run. No.
Panic.
No. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a combination. I mean, theory is nice. Theory is great. The biggest thing I could tell anybody who's looking to get into incident command is to find somebody who is more experienced than them, who is willing to teach them. Mm-hmm. And not only just willing to teach them, but willing to let them run some lower level emergencies. I often joke, like when I talk at the ED level, I talk at the hospital level, because they view me as the subject matter expert. When I walk in, they all want to go, here, you can have this, you can do this. And I tend to find that the best thing I can do for them and for the overall process is to sit there and say, no, you got this. I'm here if you need me, but let's walk through the process. So the theory is great. The incident command classes are great. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to finding the right person who's willing to teach you and give you the experiences you need to make the mistakes while having some sort of a safety net, so that you can figure out, you can learn, and you can kind of go from there. Right. No, I I like analogies on things, and I always tell people that anything that requires experience, I tend to view as like a Rolodex card. There's never a number in the Rolodex until you meet somebody, right? And if you're looking for somebody, you can kind of scroll through it and kind of know, okay, this is what I got. Experience is the same thing. I have to honestly mess up often enough to gain enough experience to learn from what I did to put another Rolodex in the card, so that at the end of the day, I can kind of sit there and say, you know what? I had an experience like this, a situation like this several years ago. Scroll through, pull it out. This is what we did. This is what worked, and this is where we needed improvement. And that's, if you kind of view it in that aspect, it kind of does help.
Awesome. Well, Paul Mikita, Lead Emergency Preparedness Specialist, thank you so much for giving us your time in your beautiful location at the end of your busy day.
I told you it was all going to come back around.
Awesome. Thank you so much.